Okay, let's read the context of this game. Where is it? About the Second Manassas Campaign. Actually, let's read the introduction first, and then we'll read that part. Introduction. Nice screenshot. Who's this? Sergeant Barry G. Benson, 1st South Carolina Volunteers, Army of Northern Virginia. Who knows but it may be given to us after this life to meet again in the old quarters, to play chess and draughts, to get up soon to answer the morning roll call, to fall in at the tap of the drum for drill and dress parade, and again to hastily don our war gear while the monotonous patter of the long roll summons to battle. Who knows but again the old flags, ragged and torn, snapping in the wind, may face each other and flutter, pursuing and pursued, while cries of victory fill a summer day. And after the battle, then the slain and wounded will arise, and all will meet together under the two flags, all sound and well, and there will be talking and laughter and cheers, and all will say, "Did it not seem real? Was it not as in the old days?" Take Command: Second Manassas is a first-person, real-time tactical strategy game. The setting is Virginia in the second year of the American Civil War. The historical Second Manassas Campaign began in mid-July 1862 and ended on September 2nd, 1862. It included the major battles of Cedar Mountain, Second Manassas, and Chantilly-Ox Hill, as well as a number of minor actions. A short history of this campaign is found later in this manual. This game puts the player into the historical battles of that campaign as commanders of various units on both sides and with the historical orders. There is also an open play option with computer-generated battles. The player takes command of an actual Civil War unit and directs its combat actions on a 3D battlefield. The player can command Union or Confederate units ranging in size from a small regiment of about 100 men to a large army with over 60,000 men. Regardless of the size of the command, the player is the commander, and his physical presence on the battlefield is represented in the game. Like his real-world counterpart, the player can move around the battlefield to observe the nature of the terrain, view the activities of enemy forces, and influence the actions of his subordinate commanders and units. TC2M was designed to be as realistic as possible. To play the game is to get a chance to experience what it was like to command troops during the Civil War, as it was in the old days. More often than not, there will be other friendly forces present in the fight, with a superior commander orchestrating the whole battle. Your command will be part of this whole, so it is important for you to follow orders. Remember, you are the commander of a unit in TC2M. It is your command. You are responsible for everything it does or fails to do. Your men will live or die based on your decisions. Your nation is depending on you to bring a victorious end to this fratricidal conflict. If you are prepared to accept these responsibilities, then strap on your spurs, buckle your sword, and take command. All right, now let's read about the actual campaign. Page 98. About the Second Manassas Campaign. The best description of the Second Manassas Campaign is the book Return to Bull Run by John J. Hennessy. Much of the information here is extracted from that fine work. Names of Union units and leaders are in regular font, and Confederate units and leaders are in italic font. The situation for the Confederacy at the end of June of 1862 had improved from nearly terminal to moderately dangerous. Okay, so they were losing, and then they were losing less. The Army of the Potomac under McClellan had been bluffed into inactivity in its camps on the James River, only a few miles from Richmond. However, a new danger was building in northern Virginia. President Lincoln had appointed Major General John Pope to command the Army of Virginia, newly created out of the hodgepodge forces that Jackson had defeated individually in the Shenandoah Valley Campaign. If McClellan resumed offensive operations and Pope moved on Richmond, then Lee, so McClellan, which one was McClellan? McClellan was the one who wasn't doing anything. So if McClellan resumed offensive operations and Pope moved on Richmond, then Lee would either be besieged in Richmond or would be forced to abandon the Confederate capital. By mid-July, Lee felt comfortable enough with McClellan's inactivity to shift Jackson, so McClellan was the one who had been inactive, to shift Jackson back to Gordonsville, so Jackson was a subordinate of Lee. Pope was engaged in small-scale raids and training his new army. I wish I had a map while reading this. Pope was engaged in small-scale raids and training his new army. In late July, Jackson was further reinforced. Jackson is Lee's subordinate. It was further reinforced by the division of A.P. Hill and told by Lee, "I want Pope to be suppressed." The second week in August, Jackson moved north and was attacked by Banks at the Battle of Cedar Mountain on August 10, 1862. So Jackson is Lee's subordinate. He moves north to suppress Pope and is attacked by Banks at the Battle of Cedar Mountain. Was Banks a subordinate of Pope? The Union forces had good initial success, collapsing the left wing of Jackson's lines. However, heavy reinforcements forced the Union corps from the field. Banks, which was the subordinate of Pope, Banks lost over 2,000 of the 8,000 in his corps. However, the victory was expensive, as Jackson lost 1,300 of the 23,000 troops in his half of the Army of Northern Virginia. Pope rapidly concentrated his forces, and Jackson retreated back to Gordonsville in the face of now superior numbers. So the Union had superior numbers. 3 days after the battle, with firm information that the Army of the Potomac, which was a Union army, was rapidly leaving the James River, so they're heading south, or they're heading for the Confederates, Lee moved the remainder of his field army under Longstreet to Gordonsville. His intention was to defeat Pope and the Army of Northern Virginia before it was joined by the Army of the Potomac. I say. The capture of a copy of Lee's orders during a Union cavalry raid led Pope to withdraw his army back behind the Rappahannock River. This frustrated the original plan of Lee to turn Pope's left and prevent forces from the Army of the Potomac from reinforcing Pope. Okay, I really need a map for this. Okay. By August 20th, both armies were facing each other across the Rappahannock River, from Kelly's Ford to above Rappahannock Station. For the next several days, Jackson, followed by Longstreet, moved northwest along the river, trying without success to find a way around the Union right flank. Finally, on August 24th, Lee proposed a bold move, sending Jackson on a wide-end run, crossing the Bull Run Mountains at Thoroughfare Gap. The objective was to get across Pope's supply line of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad and force him back from the Rappahannock River. I say. Jackson agreed with enthusiasm and rapidly got his forces on the road. Screened by Longstreet, Jackson made the risky maneuver and very hard marching brought his forces to Bristow Station during the night of August 26. Why was it a risky maneuver? I guess because he's trying to cut the enemy supply lines, but then presumably he's also risking his own supply lines. I'm not sure. Learning of Jackson's presence in his rear area, Pope attempted to concentrate his forces with the objective of surrounding and destroying Jackson. After a huge feast on captured Union supplies, Jackson marched up the railroad to Manassas Junction. Two small and uninformed Union forces attempted to recapture the junction from the raiders without success. So raiders is in quotes because they thought they were a small force, but in fact it was a very large force. On the 27th, Jackson's rear guard forces under Ewell blocked the advance of Union forces under Hooker at Kettle Run. I really need a map for this. Just south of Bristow Station. Okay. I forgot where Bristow Station was, but presumably all of this is happening like well forward of the Confederate lines. Like the Confederates have advanced into the Union rear area, right? That's what they said. Presence in his rear area. At 9 p.m. on the 27th, Jackson marched north from Manassas Junction and went to ground in the woods along an unfinished railroad just northwest of Groveton. Okay. On the edge of the Manassas battlefield of the previous year. Okay. Jackson was quite familiar with the area, having camped near there following 1st Manassas, which was a previous battle. Okay. Okay, right. They didn't even mention it. That's interesting. They had two battles in the same battlefield. Meanwhile, Longstreet and Lee were following after Jackson, but encumbered with supply trains, they could not maintain the fierce pace of Jackson's foot cavalry. Receiving regular dispatches from Jackson, they knew his situation and saw no need to force the pace. In the afternoon of the 28th, they arrived at the choke point of Thoroughfare Gap at the same time as a blocking force of Ricketts' division. So Ricketts was a Union division. After a stiff fight, the weight of numbers, 30,000 versus 5,000, prevailed, and Ricketts was forced back, leaving Longstreet with a clear path forward through the gap. Okay. So all of this is Confederates trying to push forward to cut the Union supply lines, and the Union wants to stop them. And I think they were trying to cross a river. Okay. Pope, receiving conflicting information on the location of both Jackson. Oh, is this? Oh, I do have a map. Let me duplicate this. Can I rotate? Nice. Oh, that's helpful. I'll go to page 98. Okay. So that's better. That's how you should do this. Okay. Okay, maybe let's just go back a bit just to make sure I can follow along the names. Okay, let's find Gordonsville. Let's see if we can find Gordonsville. Groveton. There's the Thoroughfare Gap. Don't see Crowsville. I would expect it to be somewhere around here. in the middle of the map. Okay, there's Cedar Mountain. Oh, Gordonsville. There it is. Jackson retreated to Gordonsville. Okay. Why did he retreat? The Battle of Cedar Mountain. So they had a fight here. And then Jackson retreated to Gordonsville after the fight here at Cedar Mountain. Okay, this map is very helpful. Let's go back even further. Camps on the James River. Where's the James River? Is that on here? There's the Potomac. Don't see James River on here. Manassas Junction. Don't see James River. Okay, that's fine. Richmond. Is Richmond on here? Probably not. Richmond is probably south. Not that familiar with the geography of Virginia. Okay, so Jackson retreated back to Gordonsville. Army of Potomac is leaving James River. We don't know where that is. I could look it up on Google Maps. Lee moved the remainder of his field army under Longstreet to Gordonsville. Okay, so they moved here. Okay. Pope withdraw his army back behind the Rappahannock River. Where's it? Okay, so here's the Rappahannock River. So Pope withdrew behind this river. So he was in front of the river, and Lee wanted to come around the left side. Okay. By August 20, both armies were facing each other across the Rappahannock River from Kelly's Ford to above Rappahannock Station. Here's Rappahannock Station. Where's Kelly's Ford? There's Kelly's Ford. Okay. For the next several days, Jackson, followed by Longstreet, moved northwest along the river, okay, trying without success to find a way around the Union right flank. Okay, that I don't understand. If they were moving northwest, okay, yeah, that would be the Union, because the Union is facing southwest, so their right flank is over here. So they're trying to find a way to come around this way. Okay, I understand. So Lee proposed a bold move, sending Jackson on a wide end run crossing the Bull Run Mountains at Thoroughfare Gap. Okay, so that is way out of the way, coming through here. The Bull Run Mountains. Where are the Bull Run Mountains? Where's Bull Run? Well, presumably he means, I don't know if they went this far out of the way. Maybe they did. And then come down here. Crossing the Bull Run Mountains at Thoroughfare Gap. Okay, so then these would be the Bull Run Mountains. Because this is how when you're crossing the mountains. Okay. I'm with these guys so far. The objective was to get across Pope's supply line of the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. Is that on here? Probably not. Well, yeah, it is. Orange Alexandria Railroad. So this red line, presumably a road and Rappahannock Station. Maybe it's just a railroad, not a road as well. I don't know. Okay. So it's a railroad and or regular road. So you wanted to force him back from the Rappahannock River. Okay, so so I see the plan. He wants to cut this red supply line, this red rail line, and by doing so, force Pope, is it? Yeah, force Pope to withdraw from the river, which would presumably allow him to cross the river. Yeah, he doesn't want him on the river, presumably because that prevents Lee from crossing the river. Or yeah, okay. So Jackson agreed with enthusiasm and rapidly got his forces on the road. Screened by Longstreet, Jackson made the risky maneuver and very hard marching brought his forces to Bristoe Station during the night of August 26. Bristoe Station. Bristoe Station. Oh, here it is. Wow, okay. So they did it. Learning of Jackson's presence in his rear area, Pope attempted to concentrate his forces with the objective of surrounding and destroying Jackson. After a huge feast on captured Union supplies, Jackson marched up the railroad to Manassas Junction. Okay, so he marched from Bristoe Station to Manassas Junction along the red rail line. Two small and uninformed Union forces attempted to recapture the junction from the raiders without success. On the 27th, Jackson's rearguard forces under Ewell blocked the advance of Union forces under Hooker at Kettle Run. Where's Kettle Run? Is that on here? Not seeing it, but presumably it's somewhere around here. Okay. Well, this is very interesting. Just south of Bristoe Station. Okay, so Kettle Run is just south of Bristoe Station here. Jackson's rear guard forces under Ewell blocked the advance of Union forces under Hooker at Kettle Run, just south of Bristoe Station. So presumably this was Union forces moving north. I guess Pope's forces moving north, just south of Bristoe Station. At 9 p.m. on the 27th, Jackson marched north from Manassas Junction. Okay, starting here, they marched north and went to ground in the woods along an unfinished railroad just northwest of Groveton. So Groveton is here. Okay. So I guess maybe anticipating Union forces coming from the northwest or north. Jackson was quite familiar with the area. Okay. Meanwhile, Longstreet and Lee were following after Jackson, but encumbered with supply trains. So following after Jackson means they were presumably coming through Thoroughfare Gap. So I guess the red lines are rail lines, but also roads. Okay. They could not maintain the fierce pace of Jackson's foot cavalry. Longstreet and Lee were following after Jackson. So then what did they leave here at the river? Did they leave anything there? Receiving regular dispatches from Jackson, they knew his situation and saw no need to force the pace. Okay. In the afternoon of the 28th, they arrived at the choke point of Thoroughfare Gap at the same time as a blocking force of Ricketts' division. Okay, so that was Union forces at Thoroughfare Gap. After a stiff fight, the weight of numbers prevailed and Ricketts was forced back, leaving Longstreet with a clear path forward through the gap. Pope, receiving conflicting information on the location of both Jackson and Longstreet, had forces marching in many directions in the area. About 6 p.m. on the 28th, the Union division of Rufus King marched along the road near Jackson's position. So Jackson was at that time near Groveton. Okay. If I'm following this correctly, Jackson is camping out at Groveton. Seeing the opportunity to smash a portion of Pope's army, he sent the order, "Bring out your men, gentlemen," thus opening the Battle of Second Manassas. I see. Marched along the road near Groveton. So the Union division, I guess, didn't know what was going on. Rufus King. The men of the Stonewall Division no doubt expected victory. However, the men opposing them were from the west and had been well drilled by their regular army commander, John Gibbon. These men in their distinctive black hats declined to be smashed and fought the Confederate veterans to a standstill until darkness, nearly 2 hours later. Learning that all of Jackson's forces were on his front, King retreated towards Manassas during the night. Okay. So presumably he retreated from somewhere around Groveton to Manassas. Is that Manassas Junction? Is there any other Manassas? I don't think so. Okay. On learning of King's battle with Jackson, Pope leapt to the unsupported conclusion that Jackson was retreating and determined to catch and destroy him. For the morning of August 29th, Pope ordered 1st Corps of Franz Sigel to attack north of the Groveton-Sudley Road. Groveton-Sudley, where's Sudley? So somewhere around there. While units from Heintzelman's 3rd Corps attacked on Sigel's right, north of the Groveton-Sudley Road. So if Sigel's attacking north, Heintzelman's 3rd Corps is on Sigel's right. The two corps combined had no more than 20,000 soldiers. Jackson, knowing that Longstreet was beyond Thoroughfare Pass and would be there later that day, need only place his 20,000 troops in a good defensive position and hold on until Longstreet and Lee arrived. I see. His position along the unfinished railroad was nearly perfect for this purpose. Sigel, don't know how to say that name. Sigel performed down to the poor standard expected of Union generals and frittered his forces away in poorly coordinated small attacks along Jackson's line. He now had a good idea of where most of Jackson's forces were, but was unable to generate any significant pressure. In the meantime, the forces of Longstreet were arriving and deploying on either side of the Warrenton Turnpike in the woods. Warrenton Turnpike. Here's Warrenton. And that's Waterloo, so this is, I guess, the Warrenton Turnpike, this black road. Maybe I should zoom in. Oh, that's not pretty. Okay. Either side of the Warrenton Turnpike in the woods and out of sight of Union forces. Okay. So basically what I'm seeing here is that I guess the Union is coming from the south, and then the Confederates are coming from the west. Something like that. south and east. Um, he felt so forces of Longstreet were arriving and deploying on either side of the Warrenton Turnpike in the woods and out of sight of Union forces. He felt confident of being able to push back Reynolds on his immediate front. However, there was a large but unknown Union force, Porter, along the Manassas-Gainesville Road. Okay, so that's Manassas Junction. There's Gainesville. So the Unions are coming, right, the Union are along this red stretch of road here. They're coming from the east. That force was in position to directly attack the flank of an advance by Longstreet. This was the standoff in the early afternoon of the 29th of August. Expecting attacks by Porter and Reynolds that he had not in fact ordered, Pope ordered additional attacks into the center of Jackson's lines. These single brigade attacks had better success than might be expected, but without support could not break the Confederate lines. After the second attack by Nagel's brigade, the Confederate brigades of Johnson and Stafford attacked on the right. Okay. And compelled the Union forces to retreat or be surrounded, largely clearing Groveton Woods of Union forces. Okay, there's Grove. Okay. The events on Jackson's front were concluded by an attack by Kearny's division. Like the attacks before, it had success, but lacked any support to follow the initial gains. Okay. The events on Jackson's front were concluded by an attack by Kearny's division. Like the attacks before, it had success, but lacked any support to follow the initial gains. Confederate counterattacks drove the Union forces back over the unfinished railroad yet again. Okay. On the Confederate right, after bolstering the far right of Longstreet's lines with Wilcox's division, Lee agreed with Longstreet's suggestion to have Hood and Kemper advance to be in position for a major attack. On the Confederate right, after bolstering the far right of Longstreet's lines with Wilcox's division, Lee agreed with Longstreet's suggestion to have Hood and Kemper advance to be in position for a major attack on the morning of the 30th. Hood's advance met an advance by Hatch, who had been told by Pope to expect only a rear guard of retreating Confederates. Their collision just north of Groveton went on into darkness when the superior numbers of Hood's division outflanked the Union forces, who retreated back up the Warrenton Turnpike. The fight ended with Union forces along the base of Doken Ridge. This brought the Battle of the 29th to a close with the Union forces. Okay. In spite of clear evidence of Longstreet's forces being on the battlefield, Pope persisted in his belief that they were miles away and that Jackson's forces were beaten and retreating. This delusion persisted for the rest of Pope's life, and he never recognized the fact that Lee and Longstreet were poised on his left flank. Left flank. Okay. His plans for the 30th of August reflected this delusion. During the night, Pope ordered Porter to move to the center of the Union position near Buck Hill. Do I have any other maps? Page 99. I really wish I had a zoomed in map. No, not seeing any. That's it. But presumably, so Pope is facing west, I think, and the Confederates have come through Thoroughfare Gap and are lined up in front of the Bull Run Mountains. Lee and Longstreet are at the south, on the left flank, facing the left flank of Pope's forces. During the night, Pope ordered Porter to move to the center of the Union position near Buck Hill. That's probably not going to be there. Okay. The morning of the 30th passed with indecision in the Union headquarters and uncertainty among the Confederate leadership. Pope planned a heavy attack on the Union right, but nothing was actually done. Lee hoped for a Union attack so that Longstreet might sweep up into the left flank of troops attacking Jackson and rout the entire Union army. None of these happened. Pope received multiple reports from commanders on various parts of the battlefield telling of the presence of the Confederates in strength. Despite all of this, he continued to believe that the enemy was retreating. Finally, at 11:30, Pope ordered Porter to attack Jackson with his entire corps. This was followed by an entirely different order to move along the Warrenton Turnpike in pursuit of the enemy. Warrenton Turnpike, Warrenton, so that's going southwest. So, I see. So Pope thinks they're fleeing southwest, down this black road, I think. Since Porter's skirmishers had proven Jackson was along the unfinished railroad, this would have been a near suicidal move. In spite of receiving multiple reports of enemy forces along the Union left, Pope placed only Ricketts' division along Chin Ridge, as he largely refused to believe that Longstreet was present. Finally, at 3 p.m., Porter sent his corps in on the attack from their starting position in the Groveton Woods, facing west, and crossing the Groveton-Sudley Highway, and wheeling northwest to attack Stark's and Lawton's divisions along the railroad. Where are the Groveton Woods? And what railroad are we talking about? The Confederates had 2 battalions of artillery, totaling 34 guns, in excellent position to enfilade any Union attack on that part of the line. The attack went in, but failed to achieve any significant breakthrough, due to both the well-placed artillery and the excellent defensive value of the unfinished railroad. Finally, the Union troops fell back through Groveton Woods to begin reforming along Dogan Ridge. Finally, to continue the record of poor Union generalship, McDowell ordered the last division south of the Warrenton Turnpike north to support Porter. Seeing the Union attackers falling back in disorder, Longstreet anticipated Lee's wishes and sent his 5 divisions in on the Union left, defended by only 2 brigades and a few batteries of artillery. Longstreet's attack was to the northeast, guiding along the Warrenton Turnpike. Okay, I think I'm visualizing this correctly. Most of the Union forces were north of the Warrenton Turnpike, and if Longstreet could get significant forces on Henry Hill, the stone bridge would be unusable, and Pope's entire army might well be captured. Hood's division had initial success, overrunning Warren's small brigade and then driving Hardin's brigade off of a small knoll in front of Chin Ridge. There, the impetuous Texans had to reform and wait for the rest of the Confederate attackers to catch up. Okay. Most of the Union forces were north of Warrenton. There, the impetuous Texans had to reform, and wait for the rest of the Confederate attackers to catch up. After a short pause, and with additional help, they attacked the Union forces on Chin Ridge. A desperate defense was waged by the Union Brigade of McLean. Okay. Buying time for reinforcements to arrive from across the Warrenton Turnpike. A truly fearsome battle occurred on Chin Ridge as reinforcements arrived from both sides. The fight finally petered out 90 minutes later as the weight of numbers from units of both Kemper's and D.R. Jones's divisions pushed the Union forces off the end of Chin Ridge. Okay. While this fight was raging, Pope had finally realized the full danger his army was in. He spent the time bought with the blood and bone of the brigades of Tower, Stiles, Colts, and Krzyzanowski by moving men and guns onto the critical position on Henry Hill. Okay, first into position were 2 of Reynolds's Pennsylvania brigades, followed by Sykes' 4 battalions of U.S. regulars. Milroy's brigade was sent up the hill soon after. 3 batteries of artillery were in position by the time fighting stopped on Chin Ridge. The strength of this position was known to many in the Union Army who had fought on this same hill 13 months before at the Battle of First Manassas. The advance of the Confederates of D.R. Jones's division that drove the last Union forces from Chin Ridge exposed them to the Union forces on Henry Hill. Reynolds' units advanced, taking Benning's brigade in the flank, which then wheeled right, as did the following brigade of G.T. Anderson, and both moved to attack Henry Hill. Additional Confederates from R. H. Anderson's division, as well as forces from Wilcox, put tremendous pressure on the Union lines, which slowly moved back. Fresh Union troops steadied the line and drove Benning's brigade back out of the fight. This is all too zoomed in. The map is not helping. The firing along the lines, especially on the Union left in the woods, continued until darkness called a halt to the third day of battle. In addition to feeding troops into the fight on Henry Hill, Pope had been organizing the retreat of the army to the fortifications at Centerville and doing a fine job at it. In marked contrast to the previous year, units largely stayed together and panic was rarely seen. By midnight, the last of the Union army was safely over Bull Run, and the head of the column already in the fortifications at Centerville. Okay. There's Centerville. The 31st of August was a day of rest and reorganization for the Union forces around Centerville. Lee, on the other hand, was determined to keep the initiative. Knowing that a direct attack on the strong fortifications at Centerville was pointless, he returned to an earlier plan. Lee directed Longstreet to demonstrate in front of Centerville, while Jackson moved north to the Little River Turnpike, and then east along the Little River Turnpike. Is that on here? No. And then east along this fine road and around the defenses at Centerville. Okay. Jackson's troops, exhausted by 3 days of combat, following a march of 54 miles in a day and a half, made slow progress in a driving rain. Pope dithered all day, sending telegrams to Washington, but came to no decisions, although reinforced by the corps of Sumner and Franklin. On September 1st, Pope finally convinced Halleck into ordering Pope to retreat to the Washington defenses. Pope started the trains and troops back towards the east. In the meantime, Jackson continued down the Little River Turnpike, which would bring him across the Union main line of retreat, Little River Turnpike, at Fairfax Courthouse after a 10-mile march. So I guess talking about Fairfax. Okay. Little River Turnpike, that's not on here. As the day continued, he repeatedly came into contact with Union units, which suggested that Pope must know of his march. Surmising that surprise was lost, he moved slowly down the pike, waiting for Longstreet to catch up. News of Jackson's flanking movement put new energy into Pope's movements. He ordered the small 9th Corps to move across the Little River Turnpike and attack Jackson. This would give time for defensive positions to be set up at Germantown, which would protect the critical junction where the Union line of retreat down the Warrenton Turnpike met the Little River Turnpike at Fairfax Courthouse. So I guess this black road here is the Little River Turnpike, maybe? Jackson continued his slow movement until reaching Ox Hill, where cavalry reported Union forces ahead. Skirmishing by the cavalry showed that there was infantry present and not inclined to fall back. These were 2 regiments of Marcina Patrick's brigade, who had been ordered to hold at all cost. Fortunately for them, Jackson saw no profit in forcing a stiff fight for the questionable benefit of inserting himself between two halves of the already retreating Union Army. He brought his half of the Confederate forces to a halt and prepared to wait for Longstreet and Lee to catch up. However, the Ninth Corps still had orders to move across the turnpike and block his advance. They moved up farm roads and about 5 p.m. found Jackson already there. As heavy storm clouds rolled in, the Union troops attacked. Shortly after battle was joined, the heavens opened with a fierce thunderstorm, and a lashing wind whipped torrential downpour. The battle continued, joined by Kearny's division, in the mud and rain until darkness and exhaustion brought this last fight of the Second Manassas campaign to a halt. On September 2nd, Pope's army continued its march back to Washington, while Lee's army turned north towards the fords across the Potomac into Maryland. Okay. There it would meet the reorganized Army of the Potomac along the Antietam Creek. Where's Antietam? Is that on here? I guess not. Interesting. Very interesting. Wish it had more zoomed in map. But this is an interesting way to learn the history of the battles.